The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers, by Maxwell King. Picture this. It's 1985, and you're sitting in the studio audience of the Oprah Winfrey Show, excitement buzzing through the air. The guest everyone's waiting for is a man beloved by millions of children, famous for his gentle voice, his cozy cardigan sweaters, and his simple yet profound message. I like you just the way you are, Fred Rogers. But here's the twist. His team made a strange request. Absolutely no children in the audience. Why would Mr. Rogers, of all people, not want kids around? Because Fred Rogers knew himself better than anyone. He understood that if even one child walked into that studio, his attention wouldn't stay on Oprah, her massive television audience, or the important points he planned to make. Every ounce of his focus would shift entirely to that child. It was a promise he'd programmed into himself decades earlier. An unwavering commitment to put the needs of the smallest people first. Well, the message didn't quite get through. When Fred walked onto that stage, the studio was packed with families. Mothers cradled toddlers in their laps. Little faces gazed up at him with wonder. And just as he predicted, the interview went, well, differently than planned. He tried his best to answer Oprah's questions, but the moment children started speaking to him directly, something shifted in the room. His pace slowed even more. His voice softened to barely above a whisper. He hunched down slightly, physically meeting them at their level. This wasn't standard television fare. You could see Oprah looking just a bit worried. Then came the moment that probably gave the producers heart palpitations. A little blonde girl broke away from her mother's arms, pushed right past Oprah herself, and ran straight up to the stage to hug Mr. Rogers. Without the slightest hesitation, he knelt down to embrace her. Minutes later, he was kneeling again, quietly reassuring a small boy who seemed worried about the miniature trolley sitting on stage. The carefully planned show ground to a complete halt. Oprah had no choice but to signal for a commercial break. For Fred Rogers, it was always this way. The children came first. Always. Today we're diving deep into the life of this extraordinary man, guided by Maxwell King's insightful biography, The Good Neighbor. This isn't just the story of some children's TV host who wore sweaters and talked slowly. This is the story of a quiet revolutionary, someone who used the most powerful medium of his time, not for fame, not for fortune, but to offer unconditional love and deep psychological understanding to entire generations. His show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, reached millions of viewers daily for nearly 4 decades, becoming a cultural touchstone and a genuine beacon of kindness in an increasingly noisy world. But who was the real man behind that sweater? Was he actually that good, that kind, that impossibly gentle all the time? Or was there more complexity beneath the surface that we never saw? Maxwell King's book reveals a man profoundly shaped by a difficult childhood, driven by deep conviction, and armed with a fearless authenticity that allowed him to tackle subjects most television wouldn't dare touch: death, divorce, anger, fear, all with unwavering empathy and respect for his young viewers. By the end of our time together today, you'll understand not just the history of a beloved television show, but the deep, guiding principles of a man who became, for millions of people, America's favorite neighbor. You'll see how his radical kindness wasn't weakness at all, but immense strength, and how his simple message continues to echo, perhaps more urgently than ever, in our complicated modern world. So let's explore the remarkable life and work of Fred Rogers. Fred McFeely Rogers entered the world on March 20, 1928, in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. His birth was incredibly difficult for his mother, Nancy, a petite woman whose doctor had warned her about the potential dangers. Exhausted after an agonizingly long labor, Nancy received stern medical advice: don't have more children. She and her husband James followed that advice for 11 years until they eventually adopted Fred's sister, Lainey. From his very first breath, Fred was wrapped in his mother's intensely protective love. Nancy Rogers was legendary in Latrobe for her boundless kindness and generosity. Coming from serious wealth herself, her father built McFeely Brick, a significant local manufacturer, and her mother's family held a fortune partly built on early investments in RCA, the very company that would later pioneer television. Nancy dedicated her entire life to service. As a teenager, she knitted sweaters for soldiers, and actually lied about her age so she could drive ambulances for hospitals during the devastating 1918 flu epidemic. She volunteered tirelessly at Latrobe Hospital, often leaving young Fred with various caretakers while she tended to others. This overprotective love, while deeply affirming, contributed to Fred becoming a shy and withdrawn child. He grew up in an impressive 3-story brick mansion, perched on the hill, the wealthy part of town, complete with a cook and a chauffeur. His family's wealth and influence were impossible to escape in this small industrial city. His father, Jim Rogers, played leading roles in numerous local businesses, including Latrobe Die Casting. The family's philanthropy became the stuff of local legend. Nancy organized an entire network of churches called Fish to identify and help struggling families, often writing checks from her own account. Jim kept a ledger of loans to employees, though he rarely bothered collecting on them. Young Fred went to school with the children of these families, constantly aware that his family occupied a special status in town. But this privilege sometimes made him a target. Classmates cruelly nicknamed him Fat Freddy and chased him home from school. He suffered from severe asthma, made worse by the polluted air of industrial western Pennsylvania. During some summers, he was essentially confined to an air-conditioned room, one of the first in the entire region, purchased by his mother specifically to ease his breathing. One particularly memorable summer, around age 10, he even spent weeks cooped up in another boy's bedroom, sharing what was reportedly Latrobe's very first window air conditioning unit. Years later, he reflected on that experience with empathy for the older boy whose personal space he'd invaded for all those weeks. The loneliness and isolation of his childhood, though genuinely painful, became a kind of crucible for his creativity. He found comfort in reading, music, and especially his puppets. Up in the attic playroom of his parents' mansion, he created his own elaborate puppet theater, sometimes performing for family members or a friendly classmate his chauffeur would bring home with him for lunch. This attic world was perhaps the very first draft of what would eventually become the neighborhood of make-believe. One playmate, Peggy McFeeters, recalled many years later, "I sometimes think I was watching the beginning of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood." Even back then, Fred carefully observed her reactions, quietly honing his craft. While Fred retreated upstairs with his puppets and piano, his parents hosted lively, boisterous parties downstairs. Their home served as the social hub of Latrobe, regularly filled with music that Fred would memorize and later play entirely by ear. Frequent family trips to New York City exposed him to opera and Broadway musicals, further fueling his passionate love for music. His family's legendary generosity was most visible during their famous annual Christmas party, thrown open to absolutely everyone, from factory workers to the wealthy elite members of the nearby Rolling Rock Club. Yet Fred often felt apart from it all, preferring to retreat upstairs to his private world. The wealth that provided so much comfort also created an invisible barrier separating him from others. His parents, deeply shaken by the infamous Lindbergh kidnapping back in 1932, had their chauffeur drive Fred virtually everywhere, carefully guarding his every move outside the home, which only reinforced his sense of being different and separate. He struggled constantly to fit in. He was sensitive, easily identified as the rich kid, and nowhere near athletic like Arnold Palmer, the future golf legend who was just a year behind him in school. Palmer remembered Fred decades later as very individual, a loner. One particularly terrifying day, school let out early unexpectedly, the chauffeur wasn't there waiting, and Fred tried to walk home by himself. A group of boys immediately started following him, chanting cruelly, "Freddy, hey Fat Freddy," chasing him until he finally found refuge in a friend's house. The typical advice from adults was to simply pretend he didn't care what they thought. But Fred did care, profoundly and deeply. That capacity for caring would go on to define his entire life's work. So how did this shy, often sickly, bullied boy transform into the confident, widely respected figure he eventually became? The unwavering support of his family proved crucial, particularly focused in three key areas: faith, independence, and music. His mother, Nancy, instilled in him the genuine joys of Christian service through her tireless community work and her patient, gentle handling of his endless questions during church services. Unlike the harsh, fire-and-brimstone Presbyterianism that some people experienced growing up, Fred's faith was deeply rooted in kindness and actively helping others. This deep-seated desire to serve showed up throughout his life, like the time he spontaneously invited a limousine driver into an elegant dinner party, then later made a special trip to visit the surprise driver's family at their modest home. Crucially, his maternal grandparents, Fred and Nancy McFeely, provided an essential counterbalance to his parents, sometimes smothering protectiveness. Grandfather McFeely, Fred's namesake and lifelong mentor, gently but firmly urged more freedom for the boy. Fred never forgot the afternoon his grandfather intervened, when his anxious mother warned him sternly against climbing on an old, crumbling stone wall at the family farm, Buttermilk Falls. "Let the kid climb on the wall," McFeely told his worried daughter plainly. "He has to learn to do things for himself." Fred felt, perhaps for the first time, that his grandfather was giving him permission and freedom to truly grow. And then there was music, his greatest passion. Both his mother and grandmother quickly noticed his early, intense interest. He started playing piano before he'd even turned 5 years old, but the truly pivotal moment came around age 10. Confiding quietly in his grandmother, Nana McFeely, he shared how desperately he wanted his very own piano. She listened carefully to her grandson and made him a simple promise. She would buy him one. Thinking it probably wouldn't cost too much, she sent him downtown to Pittsburgh via trolley to visit the prestigious Steinway store. After spending hours playing different instruments, young Fred finally selected his absolute favorite, a beautiful second-hand 1920 Steinway Concert Grand Model D. The amused salesman chuckled at the young boy's ambition, right up until Fred returned with Nana McFeely's check for the full purchase amount, nearly $3,000 back then, which would be equivalent to roughly $50,000 in today's money. Nana kept her promise without hesitation. That magnificent piano traveled with Fred for the rest of his entire life, becoming the very instrument on which he composed most of his iconic, beloved music. Music became his primary means of expressing emotion, a constant source of solace, and the powerful force propelling his artistic growth. By high school, a remarkable transformation had clearly taken place. The shy, sickly boy had emerged as a confident, capable young man. He became student council president, editor of the school newspaper, a proud National Honor Society member, and even insisted stubbornly on staying home alone during the family's traditional long winter trips to Florida, so he wouldn't miss any school. One key turning point came when his perceptive mother spotted an opportunity. A star athlete named Jim Stumbaugh ended up hospitalized. Nancy casually suggested that Fred take Jim his homework. It worked brilliantly, better than anyone could have predicted. Fred befriended the popular Stumbaugh, who then essentially vouched for him with the other students. "That made all the difference in the world for me," Fred recalled many years later. "It was as if Stumbaugh had told everyone, 'I like you, just the way you are.'" They remained close, lifelong friends. The loner had finally found his place. The sensitivity that had once seemed like such a painful weakness became the very source of his quiet strength and profound capacity for empathy. After graduating high school in 1946, Fred headed off to Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire. Why Dartmouth? Interestingly, no one in the family quite remembers the exact reasoning. Fred mentioned a vague interest in Romance languages, perhaps vaguely eyeing some kind of diplomatic career, a seemingly safe, quote, respectable path that might please his traditional parents. But Dartmouth, known back then as an intensely hard-partying, jock-heavy school, turned out to be an absolutely terrible fit for the reserved, idealistic, completely unathletic, and strictly teetotaling Fred Rogers. He was genuinely miserable there, feeling painfully out of place almost from day one. He quickly moved out of his assigned dorm and moved in with his sympathetic French teacher instead. But crushing loneliness and intense homesickness persisted throughout that bitter New Hampshire winter. True to his nature, Fred didn't simply wallow in despair. Instead, he turned inward, earnestly seeking clearer direction for his life. He often quoted a line from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince. "What is essential is invisible to the eye." Fred deeply believed that real truth came from the heart, from honest introspection and prayer. He turned back to what felt essential in his life: music. He sought out guidance from a cellist named Arnold Kvam, who was working hard to build up Dartmouth's fledgling music program. Kvam immediately recognized Fred's genuine talent, but had to admit honestly that the program simply wasn't developed enough yet to truly serve him well. He made a suggestion. Fred should check out Rollins College down in Winter Park, Florida, the school Kvam himself had just recently left, which had a strong, well-established music composition program already in place. Fred flew down during his Easter break to investigate. Professor Kvam had thoughtfully alerted some students at the Rollins Conservatory about this talented young pianist, coming all the way down from Dartmouth. On pure impulse, a group of them eagerly piled into a car to meet his plane at the airport. Among them was Joanne Bird, herself a highly talented pianist, well known around campus for her bright, infectious smile, mischievous sense of humor, and natural exuberance. They grabbed Fred right there at the airport, whisked him straight to the music department, where he immediately impressed the entire group by effortlessly playing popular pop and jazz tunes entirely by ear, something none of them, despite their classical training, could remotely do. Everything just clicked instantly. Rollins felt genuinely warm and welcoming, the complete opposite of cold, unwelcoming Dartmouth. He transferred immediately, happily declaring a major in music composition. It proved the perfect fit, creating what he'd later describe as one of the happiest times of his life, defined by deep friendship and a truly shared love of music. Joanne Bird had grown up in Jacksonville, Florida, an only child just like Fred. Her father, Wyatt, instilled in her a passionate love of reading and language. Her mother, Ibra, nurtured a deep passion for music. Ibra, who played lively ragtime entirely by ear, sat patiently with Joanne during piano practice sessions starting from age 5, making it feel like a shared, bonding experience rather than a solitary chore. A perceptive teenage neighbor recognized Joanne's exceptional talent early on and thoughtfully introduced her to a music teacher named Louise Norton. Norton became Joanne's dedicated guide for 13 formative years, carefully nurturing her talent and actively encouraging her to pursue music seriously in college, which directly led her to Rollins. At Rollins, Fred and Joanne fell into a strong, natural, easy friendship almost immediately. They shared a certain shyness, similar religious backgrounds, and, most crucially, a remarkably similar, playfully jocular sense of humor that bonded them deeply. Joanne constantly teased Fred mercilessly about his family's considerable wealth, frequently joking that he only liked her because of the small diamond ring her mother had given her. Their shared laughter and constant joking forged incredibly deep bonds between them. One favorite anecdote they both cherished for decades involved an encounter with a boisterous cab driver, enthusiastically thanking an upholsterer for installing beautiful new taxi seats, loudly exclaiming, "Larry, this makes my sweet-ass smile." For the rest of their entire lives together, that unexpected phrase became a beloved private joke between Fred and Joanne, guaranteed to make them both laugh. Fred wasn't just a quiet, studious presence at Rollins. He actually became quite popular, known for elaborate pranks, and even emerged as a passionate campus activist, successfully leading an organized movement to replace a highly controversial new college president. He excelled academically across the board, particularly shining in music and French, ultimately graduating magna cum laude in 1951. His inspiring French teacher, Baroness von Bocop, became a tremendously significant influence in his life, constantly pushing him toward true excellence, actively encouraging him to perform in theater productions, and even taking him on an extended trip through Europe one memorable summer specifically to hone his French language skills. During that eye-opening trip, Fred informally adopted a young French orphan named Gilbert Bonin, generously supporting his education financially for many years afterward. Bonin eventually went on to become a successful business executive. During Fred's final year at Rollins, Joanne was already pursuing graduate studies 250 miles away at Florida State University. Their correspondence naturally dwindled with the distance. Joanne heard through mutual friends that Fred was casually dating other people. She honestly wasn't entirely sure what their future together might hold, if anything. Fred, meanwhile, wrestled seriously with his own uncertain future. His father naturally hoped he'd eventually join the thriving family business back in Latrobe. Fred was seriously considering attending seminary to become a minister. Then, during his Easter break of senior year, Fred went home to Latrobe and encountered something completely new and fascinating: television. His family had managed to acquire one of the very first television sets in the entire town. Curious about this new technology, Fred tuned into some early children's programs to see what was being broadcast. What he saw genuinely horrified him: people mindlessly throwing pies directly in each other's faces, crude slapstick with no substance whatsoever. "I was astounded," he said years later, still sounding surprised. But he also immediately saw its vast, untapped potential. This could be a wonderful tool for education, he thought with growing excitement. Why on earth is it being used this way? He told his surprised parents that very day that he wouldn't be going to seminary right away after all. He was going straight into television instead. He saw a completely unique opportunity to blend his deep love for music, his care for children, his belief in education, and his creative abilities all together. He knew instantly, with absolute certainty, that this was his true path forward. Joanne returned to Rollins for Fred's graduation ceremony in 1951. Their old connection reignited easily and naturally. She could sense his genuine excitement about this new television venture, but worried privately about the distance stretching between them. He was moving all the way to New York City, while she still had to finish her degree down in Florida. What happened next genuinely surprised Joanne. Having heard relatively little from Fred while he was busy throwing himself into his exciting new life in New York, she visited his parents down in Florida with a friend, a talented young conductor named Christophe Von Dagny. Fred's parents carefully observed the two of them together during that visit. Just a couple of weeks later, a letter arrived from Fred, somewhat out of the blue, formally proposing marriage. After a brief moment's hesitation and genuine surprise, Joanne called him back immediately, and, after a nervous, expletive-laden opening that broke the tension, happily said yes. They were married in a simple ceremony in New York in July 1952. Fred had managed to land a valuable apprenticeship position at NBC, partly thanks to his father's useful business connections within RCA, the parent company. He felt fortunate to work directly under Kirk Browning, an exceptionally talented director who was helming the prestigious NBC Opera Theater. Fred's timing proved absolutely perfect. NBC, in the early 1950s, under the visionary leadership of Sylvester "Pat" Weaver, was experiencing a genuine creative golden age, consciously striving to elevate television as a legitimate cultural force rather than just cheap entertainment. Weaver passionately championed high artistic standards and actively fostered numerous groundbreaking shows. Fred's single most significant formative experience at NBC was working as floor manager for Browning on the historic 1951 production of Amal and the Night Visitors, the very first opera ever commissioned specifically for television. The live Christmas Eve broadcast became both a critical and popular success, attracting an impressive 5 million viewers nationwide. It was an absolutely seminal moment for Fred, beautifully bringing together all his deepest interests: childhood, music, and faith, all woven together. He also gained tremendously valuable hands-on experience working on various other shows like The Kate Smith Evening Hour and The Gabby Hayes Show. Hayes, a beloved Western show host, gave Fred one piece of crucial advice that stuck with him forever. When you're talking directly to the camera, always imagine you're speaking to just one single little child, one little buckaroo. It was advice Fred would follow religiously for his entire career. Fred might very well have stayed comfortably at NBC for years, but in 1953, his ever-watchful father alerted him to an exciting new opportunity back home in Pittsburgh, the ambitious creation of WQED, which would become the nation's very first community-supported public television station. Friends and colleagues at NBC thought he was absolutely crazy to leave such a prestigious position, but Fred instinctively sensed that educational television represented his true future. More importantly, the chaotic, brand-new, still-forming WQED offered genuine creative freedom he simply wouldn't find within the established, rigid bureaucracy of a network like NBC. He wanted the freedom to write, perform, and direct, to use absolutely all his varied talents together. He joined the scrappy startup WQED in 1954 as program manager. With the station about to go on the air for the first time and precious few resources available for producing local programming, the highest priority quickly became creating some kind of children's show. Fred and a station secretary named Josephine Vicari, soon fondly renamed Josie Carey, enthusiastically volunteered to tackle it together. Their initial plan was refreshingly simple. Josie would sing songs while Fred played along on the organ, and they'd introduce free film reels donated to the station. They had virtually no budget whatsoever beyond their basic salaries. The night before the station launched on April Fool's Day 1954, station manager Dorothy Daniel gave Fred a small stuffed tiger hand puppet as a simple good luck gift. The very next day, desperately needing anything to pop out of the grandfather clock set piece when they couldn't find the stuffed bird they'd originally planned on, Fred spontaneously put the puppet on his hand. Daniel's striped tiger was born right there, popping out daily to cheerfully announce the time and share an interesting historical fact. The Children's Corner quickly evolved into a live, hour-long daily show, largely improvised on the spot. Film reels frequently snapped mid-showing, scheduled guests simply failed to appear without warning. Increasingly, Fred filled these awkward gaps by quickly grabbing a puppet and talking conversationally with Josie from behind a simple makeshift stage. A kind of genuine magic started happening before their eyes. Josie, completely guileless and naturally trusting, fell genuinely in love with the puppets, talking to them as if they were absolutely real, living beings. Sometimes she'd even forget entirely that Fred was the one voicing them, and would rush excitedly to tell him afterward what Daniel had said to her. The natural, unforced chemistry between Josie, Fred's increasingly elaborate puppets, and their growing audience of young children became the true heart of the show. Fred steadily gained confidence, gradually introducing more memorable characters like the imperious King Friday the 13th. Letters poured into the station from delighted parents. The show's popularity absolutely exploded beyond anyone's expectations. A simple birthday party organized for Daniel's striped tiger, expected to draw maybe a handful of kids, brought out literal thousands of families, completely overwhelming the surprised station staff. In 1955, the Children's Corner won a prestigious Sylvania Award for Best Locally Produced Children's Program in the country. Even in those early, wonderfully chaotic days, Fred insisted firmly on maintaining high standards rooted in solid child development principles, a field he was actively beginning to study seriously. He recognized early on that children hear things completely literally and take fantasy very seriously indeed. This sometimes created tension and clashed noticeably with Josie's more freewheeling, natural entertainer sensibility and instincts. Jokes Fred found potentially upsetting or confusing to young children, Josie often saw as completely harmless fun and entertainment. A professional rift slowly began to form between them. Fred's personal commitment to understanding children deepened significantly when he enrolled part-time at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in 1955. eventually aiming to become an ordained Presbyterian minister. He somehow juggled demanding seminary studies with his already intense, time-consuming television work. One particularly influential seminary professor, Dr. William Orr, became a crucial lifelong mentor, personally embodying the genuine kindness and selfless service Fred deeply aspired to himself. Orr's intriguing concept of guided drift, living with clear moral principles while also embracing life's natural flow and unexpected opportunities, resonated deeply and permanently with Fred's own evolving philosophy. Most crucially for his future work, the seminary wisely directed Fred to study child development extensively with Dr. Margaret McFarland at the nearby Arsenal Family and Children's Center. This began an extraordinarily close 30-year collaboration that would profoundly shape absolutely every aspect of Fred's work going forward. McFarland, a brilliant, characteristically soft-spoken but quietly forceful expert in her field, had previously worked alongside giants in the field, like the famous Dr. Benjamin Spock and renowned psychologist Erik Erikson. She patiently taught Fred to observe children incredibly carefully and closely, to use deep empathy as a tool, to systematically connect his observations to established psychological theory, and to respond always with genuine clinical insight rather than mere sentiment. She particularly emphasized the critical importance of storytelling and truly understanding each individual child's complex inner emotional world. Fred would go on to consult her meticulously, almost obsessively, on nearly every single script and song he wrote for the rest of his entire career. Sometimes, even right in the middle of active production, he'd abruptly halt everything, leaving the entire crew sitting around waiting so he could rush back across town to McFarland's office if something, anything, felt even slightly off or potentially harmful. Excellence and absolute care were his only acceptable standards. When Fred finally graduated seminary magna cum laude in 1963, he had already clearly envisioned his television work as his true ministry and calling. The Pittsburgh Presbytery elders initially balked at this unconventional idea, wanting him in a traditional church pulpit like a normal minister. Fred, genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of formal preaching from a pulpit, politely but firmly refused that path. His good friend, Reverend William Barker, stepped in and passionately argued Fred's case before the skeptical elders, eventually convincing them to ordain him specifically for his completely unique television ministry to children. At his moving ordination ceremony, Barker boldly declared that Fred's true pulpit was the camera itself, and his congregation numbered in the millions of children watching. However, the presbytery, while granting ordination, flatly refused any financial funding or support. Fred had already ended the Children's Corner to finish his demanding studies. Josie Carey had moved on to other projects. Fred suddenly found himself adrift professionally, spending his time volunteering at local preschools, quietly testing out new puppet ideas with the children, but without any show or platform to call his own. Then came an unexpected offer from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC. Fred Rainsbury, the head of children's programming there, had somehow seen the Children's Corner years before and, more importantly, had carefully observed Fred's natural, genuine interactions with actual children. He wanted Fred to produce, and this was the crucial, challenging part, actually star in a brand new 15-minute daily show. Fred felt genuinely hesitant about being on camera himself, but Rainsbury, who shared Fred's uncompromising high standards and deep belief in television's vast educational potential, insisted it had to be Fred himself on screen. After the show proved successful with Canadian audiences, Joanne and their two young sons, Jim and John, finally joined Fred up in Toronto, but family life there was unfortunately marked by significant difficulties, particularly a deeply traumatic hospital experience for young John involving necessary surgery, which profoundly affected both the sensitive boy and his empathetic father, permanently reinforcing Fred's lifelong commitment to helping children cope with medical fears and hospital experiences. In 1966, wanting to raise their sons as American citizens and feeling genuinely homesick for Pittsburgh, the Rogers family moved back home to Pennsylvania. Fred returned with invaluable professional experience and a clear vision, but absolutely no job waiting for him. He went back to volunteering quietly at local preschools, while hoping desperately that WQED could somehow find sufficient funding for a new show. A crucial opportunity arrived through an advertising executive named George Hill. The Joseph Horn department store wanted to sponsor a short holiday program for children. Fred agreed to do it, but only on one absolute, non-negotiable condition: absolutely no commercials whatsoever aimed directly at children. Horns surprisingly agreed to simple, brief sponsorship mentions only. The resulting 13 15-minute episodes, taped at a local commercial station called WTAE, proved a genuine success, featuring early versions of beloved neighborhood characters like the kindly Chef Brockett and Handyman Negri, played by the talented jazz guitarist Joe Negri. This modest success, combined with George Hill's energetic fundraising efforts and Fred's growing network of connections, finally allowed Fred to return to WQED in 1966 with just enough support to launch a proper half-hour black-and-white version of the show, initially called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood Still One Word, broadcast regionally on the Eastern Educational Network, or EEN. But reliable funding remained frustratingly precarious and uncertain. In the spring of 1967, facing imminent cancellation due to lack of money, Fred sadly told his loyal viewers goodbye, genuinely unsure if he could possibly continue. Almost immediately, spontaneous demonstrations erupted in cities like Boston, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, organized primarily by mothers passionately demanding the show stay on the air for their children. This remarkable outpouring of genuine public support caught the surprised attention of William F. McCurdy at the Sears Roebuck Foundation. Deeply impressed by this authentic passion, Sears agreed to provide crucial national funding through National Educational Television, or NET, the EEN's successor organization. Fred characteristically insisted on keeping the full half-hour format, firmly believing it absolutely necessary for his thoughtful, deliberate approach to work properly. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, now properly 2 words, debuted nationally on NET, which would soon become PBS, on February 19, 1968. The generous Sears funding, which remarkably lasted an incredible 24 years, gave Fred the precious freedom to maintain his strictly non-commercial, uncompromisingly high-standard approach without constant financial pressure. Just 1 year later, Fred's rapidly growing credibility and reputation led him to testify before Senator John Pastor's Appropriations Subcommittee, which was seriously considering President Nixon's controversial proposal to drastically cut funding for public broadcasting. In what became absolutely legendary testimony, Fred spoke slowly, passionately, and directly to the notoriously gruff, impatient senator about the deep inner needs of children, the critical importance of helping them manage difficult feelings constructively, and his personal mission to offer an expression of care every day to each child watching. He even recited the complete lyrics to his song, "What Do You Do With the Mad That You Feel?" Visibly moved, the tough senator declared emotionally, "I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just earned the $20 million. Public television's crucial funding was secured in that moment, and Fred Rogers became its most effective national champion and advocate. With secure funding and true national reach finally established, Fred meticulously refined his unique, carefully balanced blend of reality and fantasy. He painstakingly crafted each individual episode, scrutinizing absolutely every single word through the rigorous lens of child development principles, still constantly consulting Dr. McFarland on virtually everything. His dedicated team gradually learned what they affectionately called Fredish, an elaborate set of specific rules for translating complex ideas into language preschoolers could genuinely understand without fear, confusion, or misunderstanding. For example, a simple warning like, "It is dangerous to play in the street," would be transformed, through 9 careful steps, into something like, "Your favorite grown-ups can tell you where it is safe to play. It is important to try to listen to them, and listening is an important part of growing." The show tackled genuinely difficult subjects head-on, without flinching. After Robert Kennedy's shocking assassination in 1968, Fred immediately produced a special episode practically overnight, speaking directly and honestly to worried parents about protecting children from overwhelming media violence, then carefully explaining the difficult word, assassination, to his puppets and young viewers. When his own pet goldfish died on camera, he didn't simply replace it quietly. Instead, he used the sad occasion to talk openly about death and natural sadness, even sharing his own lingering childhood grief over losing his beloved dog, Mitzi. His commitment to authenticity extended fully to the production itself. He regularly showed viewers behind the scenes at the studio, patiently explained exactly how picture-picture worked using videotapes, and even let occasional mistakes happen on air, like mismatching buttons on his cardigan, deliberately using it as a valuable teaching moment about imperfection being perfectly okay. The show's intentionally slow pace, unusually long takes, and embrace of natural silence stood in stark, deliberate contrast to the rapid-fire pace of Sesame Street, which debuted just a year and a half later. While Fred genuinely admired Sesame Street's innovations and maintained a respectful, friendly relationship with its creators, he privately worried that its frenetic pace and heavily cognitive focus might inadvertently neglect children's absolutely crucial social and emotional developmental needs. The neighborhood gradually became a genuinely cherished part of American culture, but Fred himself remained a fascinatingly complex person. He was intensely focused on his work, sometimes remarkably stubborn about his vision, and fiercely protective of the show's integrity and standards. Yet his loyal staff consistently found him an empowering, deeply empathetic boss who fostered an unusually warm, playful, mutually respectful work environment. He famously refused to have a desk in his office, preferring instead a comfortable sofa and chairs, specifically to remove any physical barriers between himself and visitors. His deep, personal faith thoroughly permeated all his work, though he was scrupulously careful to never be overtly sectarian or preachy. He prayed daily without fail, though he wasn't seeking personal success or recognition, but rather the genuine goodness of heart required to truly serve others well. His evolving spirituality became increasingly inclusive over time, drawing wisdom and insight from many different faith traditions. In 1975, feeling he'd successfully covered most of the key developmental ground for preschoolers, Fred put the neighborhood on hiatus to explore creating programming for adults. Shows like Old Friends, New Friends featured thoughtful interviews with diverse, interesting figures from various walks of life. But Fred's characteristically gentle, almost childlike interviewing style simply didn't translate effectively to adult audiences. The programs somehow lacked the special magic of the puppets and the sharp, clear focus of his children's work. By 1979, Fred honestly realized this new direction wasn't really his true path forward, and, in a crucial conversation with Dr. McFarland, conceived an ambitious new, more sophisticated phase for the neighborhood. He returned to active production with elaborate week-long thematic series tackling genuinely complex issues like superheroes carefully demystifying fantasy versus reality, with special guests like Lou Ferrigno, TV's Incredible Hulk, competition, making mistakes, and perhaps most powerfully and controversially, divorce. The Divorce Week in 1981 used the puppets' experiences, particularly Prince Tuesday fearing his parents, fighting is somehow his fault, and then running away from home, to explore children's deepest anxieties around family separation, coupled with gentle, clear explanations from Fred and valuable insights from child development experts. The show continued featuring truly remarkable guests, consistently demonstrating Fred's profound, almost uncanny ability to connect authentically with absolutely anyone. The 1981 episode with Jeff Erlanger, a remarkably bright 9-year-old quadriplegic confined to an electric wheelchair, remains genuinely iconic and deeply moving. Fred asked Jeff directly and respectfully about his wheelchair and his condition. Jeff responded with articulate, impressive self-awareness far beyond his years. Fred simply listened intently, genuinely praised his ability to help others understand, and then sang, It's You I Like, together with him. Nearly 20 years later, Jeff surprised Fred completely at his Television Hall of Fame induction ceremony, rolling his wheelchair right onto the stage to say simply, "It's You I Like." There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Music remained absolutely central to everything. The brilliant jazz pianist Johnny Costa led the show's tight trio, regularly improvising incredibly sophisticated musical arrangements around Fred's deceptively simple, heartfelt melodies. Distinguished musical guests like the legendary Wynton Marsalis and world-famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma were consistently deeply impressed by both the genuine musical quality and Fred's unique ability to connect. Fred also personally composed 13 complete operas specifically for the show over the years, whimsical productions beautifully blending music, puppetry, and important life lessons. Throughout all those decades, Fred remained absolutely steadfast in his principled opposition to commercial exploitation of children. When Burger King brazenly aired a parody advertisement using a thinly veiled Mr. Rodney character back in 1984, Fred notably didn't immediately sue them. Instead, he simply called the executive directly responsible, calmly appealing to his conscience as a father. The offensive ads were pulled from the air within just a few days. He deliberately maintained his simple, modest lifestyle throughout his life, continuing to drive an old, plain Honda, wearing modest, unpretentious clothes, finding genuine richness not in material possessions, but in deep relationships and meaningful service to others. His disciplined daily routine faithfully included prayer, Bible study, and a long, solitary swim at the local pool, carefully maintaining his weight at exactly 143 pounds, a number he loved because it signified, "I one love for you three." After producing nearly 900 episodes over decades, Fred finally decided to end production of new neighborhood shows in 2001. He emphasized he wasn't truly retiring from work, just shifting his focus and energy toward exciting new media opportunities like the burgeoning internet and, most importantly, the carefully planned Fred Rogers Center at St. Vincent College, which would preserve and extend his legacy. His final years remained remarkably busy with detailed planning for the center and numerous public appearances. Despite growing stomach discomfort and distress, he was characteristically reluctant to address with doctors. Finally diagnosed with advanced stomach cancer in late 2002, he still delayed absolutely necessary treatment to fulfill a personal commitment he'd made to serve as Grand Marshal of the Rose Bowl Parade. Surgery in early 2003 revealed the cancer had already spread extensively throughout his body. Fred Rogers died peacefully at home, surrounded by his loving family, on February 27, 2003, shortly before what would have been his 75th birthday. His extraordinary legacy endures powerfully today, not just in endless reruns or the genuinely successful animated spin-off Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, but truly in the millions of individual lives he touched so deeply. His simple, profound advice to look for the helpers resurfaces and spreads widely online during tragedies and difficult times. His unwavering emphasis on kindness, emotional honesty, and the unique, inherent worth of every single individual continues to resonate deeply, offering a gentle but powerful counterpoint to our noisy, often harsh modern world. What strikes me most powerfully, after journeying through the remarkable life of Fred Rogers, is the quiet, unwavering consistency of the man. In a world that constantly pressures us to be louder, faster, flashier, more complex and sophisticated, Fred deliberately chose simplicity, slowness, and genuine depth. He wasn't just skillfully playing a character on television for the cameras. The gentle, attentive, deeply caring person millions of viewers saw every day was authentically Fred Rogers. That radical authenticity was truly his superpower. Think seriously about the intense pressures he constantly faced. Early television was rough and tumble, chaotic, often cynically relying on cheap slapstick or easy gags to fill airtime. Later, relentless commercial pressures pushed insistently towards advertising, especially towards impressionable children, recognized as an incredibly lucrative market. Major networks actively courted him repeatedly, offering fame and fortune far beyond anything public television could possibly provide. Yet Fred held absolutely firm to his core principles, carefully learned through rigorous study, deep personal faith, and his own painful childhood experiences, that children genuinely deserve respect, that their rich inner lives are profoundly important and worthy of attention, and that media could, and absolutely should, be used primarily as a powerful tool for nurturing healthy growth, not just cynically for selling products. His pioneering focus on social and emotional learning was genuinely revolutionary for its time. Decades before emotional intelligence became a popular buzzword in parenting magazines, Fred deeply understood that helping children accurately name and constructively manage their difficult feelings, anger, fear, sadness, jealousy, was absolutely foundational to their development. His famous guiding line, borrowed directly from Dr. McFarland, "Whatever is mentionable is manageable," became the core principle of the entire neighborhood. He dared to talk openly about death, divorce, war, and even assassination on a preschool program, not to frighten or sensationalize, but to gently reassure children that their feelings were completely valid, and that caring, trustworthy adults could help them navigate even the most difficult times. And he accomplished it all with such remarkable, painstaking intentionality. The famously slow pace wasn't accidental or lazy. It was carefully designed to give children precious time to genuinely process information, to think things through, to feel their feelings. The consistent transitions, changing sweaters and shoes, the trolley ride to the neighborhood of make-believe, provided crucial structure and comforting security. The direct address to the camera created genuine intimacy, making each individual child feel personally seen and truly valued. Even the deliberately simple sets and handmade puppets actively encouraged children's own imagination rather than overwhelming their developing senses with flashy effects. Some critics attacked his approach as too soft, unrealistic, perhaps even contributing to a problematic sense of entitlement by supposedly telling every child they were special without earning it. But that criticism completely misses the crucial nuance of his message. Fred's message was never about unearned praise or avoiding standards. It was about recognizing inherent worth in every person. He carefully balanced unconditional acceptance with gentle but clear encouragement towards personal responsibility and healthy self-discipline. He genuinely believed that recognizing one's unique value wasn't an endpoint or excuse, but rather the essential starting point for contributing positively to the wider world. So what can we meaningfully take away from Fred Rogers' extraordinary life today, especially as young people trying to navigate an increasingly complex, often overwhelming world? First, embrace your authentic self fully. Fred succeeded not by desperately trying to be someone else or fit some mold, but by being fully, completely himself, thoughtfully integrating all parts of his identity, his deep faith, his passionate love of music, his fascination with child development, even his own childhood vulnerabilities and pain into his life's work. Don't be afraid of your unique qualities and quirks, even the ones that feel quiet, different, or out of step with the crowd around you. Second, actively prioritize kindness and deep listening. In our age of constant noise, hot takes, and quick judgments, Fred powerfully modeled the transformative power of deliberately slowing down, paying genuine attention, and offering sincere care to others without agenda. He showed convincingly that true strength lies not in dominance, wealth, or status, but in empathy and selfless service. Practice listening far more than you speak. Look for the helpers in difficult situations, and commit to being one yourself. Third, remember the critical importance of your inner life. Fred constantly reminded us that feelings are mentionable and manageable, not shameful or weak. Don't shy away from difficult, uncomfortable emotions. Find healthy, constructive ways to express them through music, art, writing, honest conversation, or simply acknowledging them openly to yourself. Your emotional well-being is just as important, maybe more so, than your external achievements or appearance. Fred Rogers offered a radically different model of success, one rooted not in wealth accumulation, fame, or power, but in genuine service, unwavering integrity, and deep human connection. His remarkable life stands as a testament to the profound, lasting impact one quiet, dedicated individual can have on the entire world, simply by committing to being a good neighbor. That was our exploration of The Good Neighbor, the life and work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. We've touched upon the essential core of Fred's journey and his enduring, timely message for today. But honestly, a summary like this is really just scratching the surface. The real heart of this story, the subtle details and profound moments that truly capture the essence of the man, are patiently waiting for you in the book itself. It's in reading about his specific interactions, his quiet personal struggles, and the thoughtful evolution of his ideas over decades that you really feel the full impact of his life. This overview is here simply to spark your curiosity and interest. If Fred's message of kindness, authenticity, and understanding resonated with you at all, I genuinely encourage you to pick up your own copy of The Good Neighbor. Reading it carefully is more than just learning interesting facts. It's an experience that might genuinely shift how you see the world and your place within it. You can find a convenient link to the book in the description below. Also, if this journey into Fred Rogers' world brought you some real value or insight, please consider liking this summary and subscribing to the channel. We regularly explore transformative books like this one, aiming to uncover the wisdom within the billionaire's bookshelf and grow together. Don't miss out on our next deep dive into another remarkable life.